is a very important discovery of the Buddha, and he attributes to all human sufferings and problems as ignorance. And it's because of this ignorance, that's why we say anybody, you did something wrong, you make a mistake or anything, we try to help. Why? Because you think the other person is ignorant. If you think another person is wicked and bad, born into the world, you don't want to help. So that is a very important idea. That's why Buddhism says that we all learning Buddhism to raise compassion to help others. Why? Other people, any kind of mistake they have done, and even serious killers, it's because of ignorance. Just like you have children, and when your children make mistakes, you will say, oh, the children is too young, know nothing, so we try to help. So this idea is very important. And this idea, ignorance, sometimes also named as a delusion. When we come to analyze the Buddhist, analyze the human causes of suffering, we usually say craving, hatred, and delusions, using delusion. But here, it's not using ignorance, but using delusion. Why delusion? Delusion means, the person at that moment cannot understand the cause of realities. Therefore, the person may be a very intelligent person, maybe a highly educated person, but at that moment, on that particular event, are deluded. Therefore, make a terrible mistake. That's why it's called delusions. So when we say delusions and craving, hatred, delusions, all of them are, the defilement in mind, and we refer to this as the causes to our, emotions. That's why we are becoming emotional. The Buddhist text usually say all these wrong views, ideas, it's coming back to ignorance. In other words, ignorance means we do not have an understanding on some philosophical or roots of human problems. The roots. That's why ignorance here related to wrong views about, for example, impermanent as permanent, painful as pleasant, soulless as soul, godless as God, impurity as impure, unreal as real. So these are the wrong views. So wrong views, they are based on ignorance. Although ignorance and delusion, in certain cases, they are the same. But on the other cases, delusion is more temporary, where roots of wrong views is ignorance. Therefore, ignorance is more fundamental, while delusion is more temporary. This refers to. So here, I'm just quoting from Bhikkhu Bodhi and his interpretation about ignorance. Maybe a lot of you learning Theravada Buddhism, all of you know Bhikkhu Bodhi. He's residing in New York now. This is what he said. Ignorance is not mere absence of the knowledge, a lack of knowing a particular piece or pieces of information. Ignorance can coexist with a vast accumulation of itemized knowledge. And in its own way, it can be tremendously shrewd and resourceful. As the basic roots of dukkha, ignorance is the fundamental darkness and surrounding the mind. So here, when this Bhikkhu Bodhi explains that, a person may be very, very knowledgeable, but that person still could be ignorant. Why? Because ignorance here refers to the darkness in our mind. Here, the darkness in our mind is more regarding to life, about us, how to understand human life. People can have a lot of knowledge about other things, not about human life, very knowledgeable. But those still, they can have ignorance. That's why he continues to explain, saying that sometimes this ignorance operates in a passive manner, merely obscuring correct understanding, and other times it takes an active role. It becomes the great deceiver, conjuring up a mass of distorted perceptions and conceptions which the mind grasps and attributes of the world, and aware that they are its own deluded constructions. So here, when Bhikkhu Bodhi explains this, that means ignorance is something that we do not have a full understanding about our life. Law of the world and moral laws. So these are the conditions for the ignorance. Therefore, Buddhism coming back to that is ignorance means do not understand first the fundamental truth. Why do not understand the fundamental truth is called ignorance? Because the fundamental truth, as we discussed in January, means analysis of the human suffering and the causes of human suffering. In other words, ignorance means those who do not understand our human suffering, do not know the causes of human suffering, means ignorance. So basically means those who are ignorant means they do not understand human sufferings, basically. Second is do not understand the nature of self. In other words, those who are ignorant, Buddhism calls them, that means they do not understand that we as human beings, we don't have a permanent self, or permanent entity, or soul. That is the second ignorance. Third ignorance, according to Buddhism, is do not understand the cause and effect, the causal law, particularly related to human life. As we said earlier, the Buddha got enlightened under the Bodhi tree and understands the law of the universe. When this law of the universe applied to the human life, it's called the law of karma. This do not understand. Therefore, when we look at the context of ignorance, here, all are related to human life. In other words, ignorance means somebody do not understand human life. First, this person do not understand the sufferings and causes of suffering about human life. Second, do not understand that life is a changing process, but he thinks there is a permanent self. Third is the ignorant person do not understand causal laws. So these are the three contexts of ignorance. So by this we can say quite clearly, ignorance is about ourselves. We do not understand. Therefore, we shall not, misunderstand that ignorance is the ultimate beginning of the universe, ultimate beginning of the human race. That is a misunderstanding. So ignorance is not the first cause. Why? Because right now, right here, all of us, we still have ignorance. Ignorance on certain things, we still have. Therefore, it's not a very beginning. That's why in many cases, the Buddha said, incalculable is the beginning, monks, of this faring on. That means samsara. The earliest point is not revealed of the running on, the faring on of being cloaked in ignorance, tied to craving, ignorance. Therefore, ignorance is not the beginning of life. That is not the Buddhist idea. Second, I take out craving. As we said earlier, craving is a breaking point for Buddhism. From here, then Buddhism saying that we can breaking up this circle, breaking up the circle of, lead by ignorance. So This is a critical point because if we can realize this as the cause and fighting its causes, then we can solve the problems. Therefore, Buddhism analyzed how craving comes up. Buddhism say craving is because of, first is here, is we have feelings. Because, for example, I'm drinking tea here. The tea is so nice and delicious. The craving comes up. I want to have more. Not only more, you buy some tea for me. So that is a craving. Therefore, craving and also hatred based on feelings. When I drink the tea, it's too bitter, not good. That kind of aversion arises. Therefore, craving and aversion, in fact, is the same kind of feeling. And this feeling, how this feeling comes up, it's because of the contact. So I drink the tea, that is contact. Because of this contact, we have a feeling. Because of a feeling, then we have a thirst. Thirst here as a craving. So craving means tangha. Tangha can be translated as a craving, can be translated as thirst, many things. With this analysis, we have a clear understanding is that craving is based on feelings. And why we have feelings? Feelings based on contact. Why we have contact? Contact is based on the six faculties. Therefore, if we wanted to tackle craving, we must understand feelings. That's why in Buddhism, it's called four foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness on the body, mindfulness on the feeling, mindfulness on the mind, mindfulness on mental objects. Therefore, feeling is the second most important part of mindfulness practice. So that itself already demonstrates the importance of a feeling. That's why Buddhism says, if we pay attention only to desires, we cannot solve the problem. And we need to pay attention to the causes to desire, then we solve the problem. The causes to the desire is feeling. In other words, if we become the slaves of our desire, slaves of our emotion, we will suffer. Why? When we get angry, for example, you're fighting with your family members, fighting with others, you suffer. But in order to take care of this emotion is a craving, is a desire, and how it arises is because of feelings. That's why paying wise attention to feeling. So when we feel, I drinking this cup of the tea so nice, stays there, that's enough. Still you can enjoy the tea, still you can enjoy the food without craving. But if you go on a little bit further, because of this, unwise, do not pay wise attention, then your craving comes up and leading to suffering. That's why Buddhism says that in order not to get into troubles, becomes the slaves of our desire, we need to pay wise attention to our feelings. In other words, if it's a nice, hot weather outside, inside the room, so nice, so cool, and we enjoy it, that's enough. If you, based on this feeling, further proliferates, it's called papancha, then all the problems comes up. That's why Buddhism for us is to get a kind of called freedom, freedom from the desires. Freedom from the desire is very important. In order to get freedom of the desire, we must have wise attention to feelings. That's why feeling become an important thing. So craving is a fuel for all our activities. And here, when we think about the craving, we are always, discussing craving or tanha in its negative aspects. In fact, our craving, some of them are good, but we use another term in Buddhism called chanda. For example, all of you coming to here with the intention to learn, that is also another craving. But this craving is a good craving. That's why this is called chanda. Chanda is something, it's with proper attention. If you have a proper attention, and this proper attention lead you to learn more and understand more, that is a good craving. Therefore, when Buddhism discusses craving, it's always in its negative aspects, remember. Negative aspects. Good aspect, positive aspect of craving, it's called chanda. Chanda is also craving for good things. And this craving, and because it's a negative aspect, as a fuel, and this fuel, driving, fuel means as a driving force for us to put it into action. You want more, and you earn more, doing all these kinds of things, and then it's come to cleaning. Cleaning is much more intensified the desire, and intensified the desire you want to persist. That's why here is a craving serving, as we said earlier, a very important part to break up this. That's why Buddhism says mindfulness here is very important. Mindfulness in the way that whatever the feelings comes up, whatever the feelings, our feelings again, comes up, we need to be mindful about these feelings. Feelings themselves, they come automatically. We can't reject it. For example, the weather, when you go out immediately extreme hot, and you can't resist it, you can't choose. But when the feeling comes up, and depending on feeling, there is a craving. And before this coming to craving, if you are mindfully observe your feelings, then you can stop there. Stop the craving right at the very beginning when it's a start up. That's why it's mindfully living there. You pay the wise attention to feeling, then we can stop the craving right there. That's why practicing mindfulness is very important. Practicing mindfulness here is right into our individual experience. Daily individual experience. If we always observe our feeling, if a bad feeling comes up, somebody says something nasty and bad feeling comes up, you say, oh, this is a feeling arises. And this feeling, why it arises? Because there is something, what they say, something bad arises. When you realize this, then this feeling gradually dies out. But if you think, I'm angry, you don't think that's a feeling, you involved into feeling. What do? Fight with another person immediately. Therefore, mindfulness, the first thing and most important thing is put feeling into a place to observe. So feeling becomes the object of observation. Therefore, you distance feeling with you. And in that sense, you want every time getting into the trouble of anger. So that is a very important part. That's why between feeling and craving, as Matthew earlier said, meditation, there is a subtle gap. There's a mindfulness fill up this gap. If mindfulness fill up this gap, then you won't get angry. You won't get cravings. Mindfulness is a very important practice here. That's why the temples and training centers all discuss mindfulness meditation. You sit there, mindful about the body, second, mindful about the feeling, and you look at it. It's if we can every day practicing this, then our mind will become more calmful, peaceful. Our mind will not be, become a slave of our feeling, and the feeling drive you everywhere. That's why practicing mindfulness is very important. But before practicing mindfulness, we need to understand this. Oh, sorry. We need to understand this. Therefore, understanding is a crucial part of the Buddhist practice. If we do not understand this part, you will never practice. Why? Because you don't know. That's why practice is driven by understanding. Since understanding things that it's beneficial for us, good for us, that's why we do it. That's why understanding itself is already a practice. That's why here comes up, Buddhism always comes back to intention. Why intention is important? Because intention you understand, then you intentionally put into practice in your daily life, then you stop craving right there when the feeling arises. Therefore, some of the people, as we earlier discussed with Matthew, saying that, why are you learning so many kind of knowledge? Nothing, useless this knowledge. That is a misunderstanding. Why? Because it's only this knowledge you learn, then you will put the intention to practice. Even if you do not have the knowledge, you never know about this, you will never practice. The practice starts from knowledge. That's why just, for example, I gave you in mainland China, last month I went there, a Buddhist temple, they have a Buddhist college. 200 Buddhist nuns living there, practicing. Every morning, the master told everybody to to eat this, they fried the gingers. After frying, the gingers become very dark and very hard to bite. Everybody eat. Because the master told everybody, why? Taking this ginger is good. Disperse your, that kind of moisture in your body, then your health will be improved. It's very important. But there is newcomers come from outside and visit the temples and also temporary practices, but without any kind of knowledge about this. When these kind of things to give them, they never eat. Why is this kind of things looks bad, looks ugly, and when they eat is not good, they don't eat. Why they don't eat? Because they don't have the knowledge. Because they don't have the knowledge, these kind of things, when you eat every day, good for health. That's why knowing about this itself is very important. It's the first part, already part of the practice. And based on this, then you practice then you practice mindfulness here, then you stop feeling right there. And after craving arises, second is called cleaning or upadana. So cleaning of upadana means you have a very, very strong, cleaning tool. So this, of course, much more disturbance in our life. There are a few things here. Cleaning to sensual pleasures and desires. That, of course, is a basic thing for all of us. Second is wrong views. A lot of us, in fact, our life, we lead into trouble because of our wrong views. But these views, of course, is because what? We might learn something outside, badly grasped it. We do not have a clear understanding of the things. We form a kind of wrong views. So these wrong views, in fact, leading to many people's suffering. Second is clinging to external observances and rituals. Many of the folk religions emphasizing on rituals, a lot of them. In fact, many of them are not contributing to developing our mind. Buddhism says that is a wrong cleaning. Third is, of course, clinging to the self, thinking that there is an entity within us, continues there. And since there is an entity, a soul, and we want to get more and more for us, You want to possess more and more. So these are the four things we want to clean. Particularly the views is most dangerous one. Even the last one, it's still a view. But this view is the most fundamental view, so important. Therefore, it lives separately from these views. In fact, wrong views means you have a soul. So this is also view, very important. So it's independently listed off. In other words, wrong views, evil views is really leading us to so many sufferings. So basically, the Buddhist teaching to clear up these wrong views, a lot of them. And the last one is the most difficult view to be removed from us because, and this view is, we have this view for years and years since from our birth. So the breaking chain is that to practice mindfulness, mindfully observing all our life and learning from Buddhism to understand our life. Learning from Buddhism, understand our life, that is already a kind of wisdom. So we must understand the psychological impact on our life is very important. Psychological impact means that our views, our ideas, our thoughts, which impact our life every day. Every day. Therefore, if we have wrong views, wrong ideas, wrong thought, every day we are doing the wrong things. That's why learning Buddhism is to gradually we acquire right view, right idea, right intentions. All this contributing to wisdom. And when we understand these things, then we find the true causes already. That is coming to the cessation of suffering, true causes. So earlier it's discussed a lot of these things. It's in order to find these causes to our suffering. So our suffering here, craving, clinging, bad karma, all these are the causes. But when we look deeper into our life, we find that behind craving, clinging, karma, this is ignorance. In other words, ignorance is the root cause of all human sufferings. We must understand this. Therefore, through understanding this, what we are learning and practicing Buddhism is finally to tackle ignorance. That is the main aim for Buddhist practices. Therefore, Buddhist practices are different from all other religions. Other religions ask you to go to heaven, go to here, enjoy life. Buddhism says, no need. If you can tackle your ignorance, you can be happy right here, right now, without going to heaven. That is a very marvelous idea. The ignorance is the roots of the problems. So cessation of the ignorance is the problem here. Therefore, the Buddhist idea of practicing is in the reverse order. Cessation of ignorance. That means if we understand human life better, understand the causes of a problem as a root, then we won't create bad karmas. So volitional formation. So volitional formation also ends up. In other words, we do not perform bad karma. When we do not perform bad karma, then whole samsaric life also ends. Then there is no next life, no sense, no this contact, all. That's why the roots is ignorance. So you put it in the positive words is that learning Buddhism is to arise wisdom, in other words. It's only wisdom can tackle ignorance, just like in this room. When we turn off the light, become darkness. Darkness is ignorance. When we turn on the light, then ignorance is gone. Precisely, when we rise wisdom, ignorance naturally, disappear. So the Buddhist idea is that through analysis of the human life, we understand ignorance as the root cause, and the end of this all human suffering is called the third form of truth, end of the sufferings. So the end of the suffering naturally comes. That's why it says that with the reminderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, when ignorance disappears, wisdom arises, then comes the cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formation, come to end of the sufferings. So this clearly demonstrates ignorance is the root, and this is through what? Through analytical inquiries. That's why Buddhism says that if you want to end up human suffering, you need to analyze human sufferings. Through what? Through a kind of rational, understanding. And only when you understand human life and have analytical understanding, then you come to the end of sufferings. So this demonstrates this rational thinking. He said, then monks, it occurred to me, this is before the Buddha got enlightened, he was sitting down at the Bodhi tree and thinking over about life. This is what he thinks. It occurred to me, when what does not exist, age and days come to be end. And he's asking these questions. Then, with the cessation of what does the cessation of the age and the days come to about? Then monks, through careful attention here means rational thinking, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. So you can say, here arises a wisdom. Wisdom through what? Wisdom is through careful attention. When there is no birth, age and days does not come to be. With the cessation of birth, there come to cessation of aging and days. So that is his first understanding. From there, he worked backwards till ignorance. In other words, he's using analytical inquiries. Analytical inquiries to our human, existence, to our human basic existences. It is through here, that's why he understands thoroughly the human idea, human, experience. And from here, then the Buddha said, in order to tackle the human problem and you understand it and start to practice, there is a transcendental path that is recognized and suggested by the Buddha, and we need to practice. Here, in this Upanishad Sutta, and saying that these are 12 of them also. Faith, in other words, in order to learn the Buddhist teaching, first you must have faith. But this faith is different from other religions' idea of faith. Other religion means that you have a faith in the God. But here is faith in the Buddha's teachings. Faith in the Buddha's teaching serving as only as the beginning. But once when you started to practice, then there's a faith just left behind. When you have this, second is joy. Joy here also means you understand the Buddhist teaching. Through this understanding, you fill with joys. Because you learn something and you truly understand. And with this joy, there's rapture. Rapture here means not only joy is some kind of excitement. And rapture means that much more calm and peaceful joy, in other words, and from there. Then from there is tranquility, happiness, and it's because of this. Then, learning Buddhism, practicing Buddhism is not dry, but something stimulates, something motivates you. With this happiness, motivates you further to practice and further to concentration. And then here, of course, means making all different kind of meditation practices. And from here, you get knowledge and vision of things as they are. Here, knowledge and things, vision of things as they are is about our life again. You understand life better, and you get the true knowledge. Because you have the true knowledge, then you attain, detachment. You do not, attach to things. And then from here, of course, finally you have the knowledge of the destruction of the cankers. Knowledge of the destruction of the cankers means that those who get enlightened and become the Buddha, they know themselves. If you do not know whether you get enlightened or not, and surely that means you do not get enlightened. Their knowledge is very important. It's just like you drink tea. When you drink tea, you know the tea is good, bad, hot, or cold. If you do not know the tea, the flavor, that means you never drink the tea. So that is a knowledge, the final knowledge, you know it. Therefore, faith is still spurred up by what? By this kind of sufferings. We human beings, we suffer with various different kind of things. Because of this suffering, we want to find a solution. We want to find a solution to our suffering. Then comes about Buddhist teachings. Therefore, Buddhism do not like blind kind of absorptions, blind faith. But this faith serving as a kind of a starting point, but this faith is based on understanding. Based on understanding of the Buddhist teaching, and Buddhist teaching, you understand. Since you understand, then you have a confidence in following the Buddhist teaching. From there, you understand better, and this faith as a driving force, so that you put all your effort and knowledge into, investigating of human sufferings. And so here, then, you further practice. That's why Buddhism do not like blind faith. Blind faith, it's a distraction, because blind faith means that you just believe, that's enough, without knowledge, without questioning, without further inquiries. So that is called blind faith. But Buddhism encourages a kind of faith based on understanding, based on totally understand the Buddhist teaching and also about our life. That's why the Buddha said here, the destruction of the cankers, here means suffering, monks, is for one who knows and sees. I say, not for one who does not know and does not see. Knowing what, saying what, does the construction of the cankers occur? Here, the following is a long discussion. Here means knowing and saying about human suffering, in fact. And this human suffering, here again, is about the 5 aggregates of cleaning. In other words, the knowledge is about ourselves. We understand the 5 aggregates of cleaning, that means understand our life. Therefore, the Buddhist idea of faith is based on full understanding. And this full understanding is not understanding outside God, but understanding of our own life. Understanding the 3 aspects, in fact. First aspect is that understanding this life, 5 aggregates of the cleaning, the first is impermanence. Everything is changing. We must understand. Second is that the 5 aggregates, they are working together with a dependent horizon or dependent origination. How these 5 aggregates operate depends on this principle. Therefore, we should understand how the 5 aggregates arises, exists, and continue. And also how the aggregates ceasing and disappearing. That's why this faith in Buddhism is based on understanding based on complete, penetrative understanding. Therefore, faith, how to arise faith is through hearing the true dharmas, through hearing the Buddhist teachings. Buddhist teachings are different from all other religions is that Buddhist teaching all about analysis of human life, not about outside God. Since it's all about human life, in other words, understanding of the Buddhist teaching means understanding of us, understanding of the human life. That's why this become an emotional bond. This emotional bond for us as a driving force, we continue to implement the Buddhist teaching in our life and continue to practice it. Why? Because we understand it. Because we understand it and the mechanics and also the causes. Therefore, we put this into our actions. Therefore, faith hearing from the Dharma is coming from here, all this. We discussed this already. Let's gradually grow up and you practice. With this, we come to the conclusion of today's lectures. I just first as a summary, then we discuss some aspirations. First is that dependent arising realized by the Buddha, it's a universal law. That is the most profound awakening of the Buddha. And because he understands this, that's why he is called the Buddha, awakened one. And second is that this law applies to say that in this world, nothing exists in isolation. Everything exists depending on everything else. So the whole world is a continuity. The second is that this teaching in Buddhism is called the middle path, or middle teaching. And this middle teaching means that it transcends all different kind of extreme views and any kind of situation, particularly through the analysis of life, then you understand life. Understand what? Life is as a dynamic process. Because it's a dynamic process, it's always changing. Therefore, nothing is fixed. Nothing is fixed. That is a very important understanding. Third is the human conditions. Human life is consisted of so many different kind of conditions, and when these conditions put together, working together, is called five aggregate. Then that is the human life. But in this human life, there is no permanent entity as I, and because there's no I, then there's no craving. So because many misunderstanding thinking that there is a permanent I, therefore that is itself is ignorance, then from there arise cravings. So from this simple conclusion we can say is that the Buddha's realization about dependent arising has a huge impact on our life. It's a totally understand the human life, and he explained it. So with this, we can say the fourth one is it's a practical focus. So when the Buddha understands this world of human experience, and he focuses on analysis of the human life, and in order to find the causes and conditions to human sufferings. Therefore, it does not serve as a first cause. And most important part in this analysis is a turning point, the ignorance as a beginning, and craving as a breaking point, a turning point. And Buddhism says, if we start with here, then we can trace it back to ignorance and solve the problem. And in order to tackle with the craving, we need to look into the conditions. The condition is a feeling. That's why mindfulness practice, most of them focusing on feelings. And in order to stop craving at the very beginning, at the very first appearance. So these are the conclusions. With these conclusions, we can see is how this can be applied in our life. First is that our life is only a flow, only a continuity. And we must realize it's not a statue. We are not statues, not changing. It's a flow, it's a continue. Since it's a continue, there is a rising, there's a disappearing. Always there is a. We come into this world, and one day we will leave this world. Therefore, these are the realizations first. Therefore, the text says that the very moment of a fresh opportunity of an old version every day is dying, a new version every day is coming in, so we become much more wiser because we understand this process. Therefore, we were released from the burden of a self because we realize that life is only a process. It's always changing. Since it's changing, there's no permanent self. Therefore, nothing is there to burden us. You just giving up the old and realizing the new because human life is only a process. And with this understanding, we always, as the Buddhists say, focusing on solutions. We have so many problems. We have so many difficulties. Focusing on the solutions. In order to find the solution, you need to understand and analyze human life. That's why Buddhism focusing on suffering and cessation of suffering. That is focusing on solutions. The Dhamma itself is focusing on solutions, in fact. So that is the end. That is the end. Let me see. Oh, yes, we have another 20 minutes. Then we can discuss. This lecture is too philosophical, yeah? Tomorrow we are teaching karma. Yeah, most important Buddhist teaching. We will discuss karma and human happiness. Yeah.
But too bad, I think I cannot make it.
Okay. Yeah? You are busy, yeah? Okay. Yeah. Today's lecture, although it's philosophical, but it's very fundamental for Buddhist teachings, because all other Buddhist teachings based on this foundation. Without this foundation, all other Buddhist teachings cannot establish. That's why I put here to understand. And this is also related to tomorrow's lectures. Tomorrow's lectures based on today's lectures. Yeah.
Just now you mentioned the joy, rapture, tranquility and happiness, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain the subtle difference? Because they sound all like the same thing to me.
Yeah. Here.
What's the small difference between them?
Yeah. Little bit, differences. For example, joy means when you have learned something, any kind of teaching, in fact, you understand, suddenly you feel the joy. For example, your mathematics or any other things, you understand. You feel the joy. That is a little bit kind of excitement. But the excitement is not what Buddhism wanted. But without that, you cannot go further. That's why here, rapture. Rapture is more towards tranquility, is a passing stage. That's why here says tranquility. Tranquility, it means that after the excitement, you become more calmful, peaceful, since this understanding about the Buddhist teaching will last long, and that leading to happiness. That's why the joy, rapture, tranquility, from here you can say, the leading to happiness. Happiness here refers to a state of the mind, more peaceful, calmful, without external stimuli, but within you understand something. The mind is very quiet, peaceful. That is what Buddhism wanted, in fact. It's with these four of them, serving as a kind of, driving force for the practice and continue. Because if you do not have this kind of happiness and rapture, you cannot continue to practice. Yeah. That's why it's an important part. From here, you can say back to concentration again. Concentration means sense mind is so calmful, peaceful, so your mind can focus on anything, concentrate anything. And from there, you can say concentrating on things about human life. Concentrating on human life, and here in fact, in the meditation here comes about is meditation on the mind, meditation on the mental objects, many things. And from there, you understand human life, then that is the knowledge. Understanding the human life, the knowledge comes up, and the vision of things as they really are means that you understand life as it is, really the real situation. And here, then you do not attach to any kind of things. Because attachment itself, Buddhism saying that, is a cause of suffering. It is here you realize that you are truly in the final moment. It's called emancipation. Emancipation. That means you finally released from all kind of sufferings. So this stage, 10 stages, is through learning of the Dhamma. Sorry. So this learning, you can see, is a process always mental, psychological development. And this psychological development means that you sit down there and you ponder over the Buddhist teaching, and from there, you gradually truly not only understand the teaching, but you realize the teaching. That's why here, come back is these 10 stages. And the first of this, second, third, fourth, 5, you can say, it's concentrating on, in fact, here more or less about feeling again. Because joy, rapture, tranquility, it's more about feeling again. But this feeling is a mental feeling, psychological feeling. Because of this psychological feeling, it's leading you to further to investigate. The concentration here refers to different kind of meditation. We have a samatha meditation, we have a vipassana meditation. Of course, here didn't go into detail to discuss all these things. Through investigation, then you have the knowledge and vision. That's why in other words, for Buddhism, the further concentration on different kind of meditation is based on your early participation, early practice of Buddhism, understanding. If there's understanding from the faith here, you understand, then you lead to these kind of things. So understanding, as Bhikkhu Bodhi said itself, is that understanding itself is already part of practice. We shall not misunderstand that understanding is not a practice itself. That is a misunderstanding.